Evening fog clung to the trees as twilight deepened into night. Alone in a remote wooden cabin, Alex Murphy settled into the rustic space, looking forward to a weekend of solitude and relaxation. The cabin, nestled deep in the heart of an ancient forest, had been a gift from a friend who had inherited it from a distant relative. It was an old place, filled with memories and curiosities. One such curiosity was the large, ornate grandfather clock that stood solemnly in the corner of the living room. The clock was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, with intricate carvings of woodland scenes and a pendulum that ticked with a hauntingly rhythmic precision. Alex had found it peculiar that the clock didn't seem to work. Its hands were stuck at midnight, and though it was wound and set properly, it never seemed to chime or move. The night came swiftly, and as the wind whispered through the trees, Alex felt a growing unease. The forest outside was dark and dense, and the only light came from the flickering flames in the cabin's stone fireplace. Alex tried to dismiss the unsettling feeling, focusing instead on a book and a hot cup of cocoa. But the silence of the cabin was occasionally interrupted by strange noises, a rustling in the trees, an occasional creak from the old wooden structure. Just as Alex was beginning to relax, the grandfather clock emitted a low, resonant chime that cut through the silence like a knife. The sound was dissonant, almost wrong, as though the clock was struggling to produce it. Alex glanced at the clock, its hands still firmly pointing to midnight. The eerie chime repeated, each note hanging in the air like a ghostly whisper. The hairs on Alex's neck stood on end. There was something deeply unsettling about the sound. His friend who had gifted Alex the cabin had mentioned something about the clock being troubled, but Alex had thought it was just a superstitious old story. As the night grew darker, Alex decided to investigate. The fog outside had thickened, and the forest seemed to close in around the cabin. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of trepidation, Alex stepped out into the murky darkness. The beam of the flashlight barely cut through the thick mist, and the only sounds were the crunch of leaves underfoot and the distant hoot of an owl. As Alex ventured further from the cabin, the eerie feeling intensified. Shadows danced among the trees, and the distant rustling seemed to come from all directions. Alex's flashlight flickered, and the beam settled on an old, gnarled tree with a hollowed trunk. Something about the tree was strangely familiar. As Alex approached, the flashlight revealed what looked like strange markings carved into the bark, symbols that seemed ancient and indecipherable. A sudden rustling noise behind Alex made them spin around, flashlight sweeping the area. For a brief moment, the beam illuminated something, an immense, shadowy figure with eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. The figure moved quickly, vanishing into the trees before Alex could get a clear look. The forest fell silent again, and Alex was left alone with the pounding of their own heart. Racing back to the cabin, Alex locked the door behind them and tried to shake off the dread that had settled in their chest. The clock chimed again, its sound more insistent this time. Alex felt a cold draft and realized the temperature in the cabin had dropped significantly. The fire in the fireplace had dwindled to embers, casting long, flickering shadows across the room. As Alex sat by the fireplace, trying to calm their racing thoughts, the clock chimed once more. This time, the chime was accompanied by a deep, guttural sound, a growl that seemed to resonate from within the cabin itself. Alex's flashlight cast erratic beams across the room, and for a brief moment, they saw the shadowy figure from the woods reflected in the glass of the grandfather clock. Panic-stricken, Alex grabbed the flashlight and moved to investigate the source of the growl. The cabin creaked and groaned as if responding to their fear. The growl came again, closer this time, accompanied by the sound of scratching, something clawing at the walls. Alex found himself drawn back to the grandfather clock, now seemingly more menacing than ever. As the clock struck midnight, the hands began to move, slowly and with an eerie, mechanical precision. The chimes echoed louder, more distorted, as if the clock was not merely keeping time but summoning something. The air grew colder, and the creature from the woods seemed to be closing in. With each chime, the scratching grew louder, and the growl seemed to resonate through the walls. Alex could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he turned to face the darkness. Just as the clock struck midnight for the final time, The front door burst open with a violent force, and a gust of icy wind rushed into the cabin. The shadows in the room seemed to twist and writhe as the creature emerged from the darkness. It was a grotesque, hairless form, its nude body covered in sagging, leathery skin. Deep, sunken eyes stared out from hollow sockets, and its mouth was filled with long, sharp teeth. 2 small holes served as its nose, and its fingers were long and bony, ending in claws stained with dried blood. Alex noticed something horrifying: a human eyeball impaled on the end of one claw, like a child playing with black olives on their fingers. The creature advanced slowly, whispering in a low, hissing voice, "It won't be long now." Alex, trembling and paralyzed with fear, could only watch as the creature moved closer. The clock's chimes ceased abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The creature seemed to be drawn to the clock, its eyes locked onto the moving hands and the darkened glass. In a desperate attempt to save himself, Alex grabbed a nearby poker from the fireplace and swung it at the creature. It passed through the shadowy form, but the creature recoiled and let out a screech that echoed through the cabin. Suddenly, the clock's chimes began again, and the creature let out a final, guttural roar before vanishing into the darkness. The temperature in the cabin began to rise, and the wind subsided. The clock stopped its chimes and remained silent, the hands frozen at midnight once more. Exhausted and shaken, Alex slumped to the floor. The silence of the cabin felt almost deafening after the ordeal. The creature had disappeared, leaving behind only the remnants of its presence, a lingering cold and the unsettling feeling of having been watched. As dawn broke and the first light of morning crept through the cabin windows, Alex packed his belongings quickly, determined to leave the forest behind. The grandfather clock stood silent in the corner, its mysteries unresolved. Alex would never fully understand the connection between the clock and the creature, but he knew one thing for certain: the cabin held secrets better left unexplored. As Alex drove away from the forest, they glanced back one last time, hoping to leave the shadows of the past behind. The cabin, shrouded in mist, remained a dark reminder of a night filled with fear and the unknown.